Awesome. Well, isn't it good to sing praise to our God together? Amen? Wonderful. Well, it's good to be with you. It's really good to be back here at church with my people. Been resting, was on vacation for the last couple of weeks. That the elders and all of you have been so gracious to me to give me time off, like most normal jobs, and so that's been a blessing. I think the older that I get, you see that there are different seasons in life. There's seasons in the year and how the weather changes and its effect on the land. There's also seasons in our own personal lives, and there's times to run hard and there's times to rest and relax. And so I'm grateful for the time to rest and relax. We didn't really do a whole lot. Me and my family went camping for a few days, but for the rest of the time, we just kind of stayed around here, did staycation here in the best city of the world. So that was pretty awesome. And now I'm like fully rested and I'm ready to. I didn't quite get fully bored, but I'm ready to run. I'm ready for fall. Fall. It's if you don't know it, it's both statistically and in our own experience as a church, it's probably the biggest growth season for churches and for us as a church. We have more new people that come in among us and visit us at this time more than any other time of the year, and so it's an exciting time for us. We're excited, especially if you're new, that you are here. We hope that you enjoy your worship experience today, so much so that you'll come back and come and be a part of who we are as a church. If you don't know me and you are new, my name is Duane. I'm a pastor here alongside a few others who serve under our head senior pastor, Jesus. For me, I love Jesus. I love my family, my wife, and my 3 girls. I really love this church. I love our church, and I love our city. And so my hope and prayer for you is that you would join in loving those things as well along with us, that you would love Jesus, you would love your family, you'd love this church and love our city. For our sermon time today, we are back in Genesis, the first book of the Bible. When I looked it up, it's been almost quite a year since we started this tour, this journey through the first book of the Bible, Genesis. Now, with a fall and the onslaught of fall here, we are starting really the very last leg of Genesis that'll take us into Advent at Christmas time in December. With the book in Genesis, what's been going on, tension has kind of been mounting and mounting more and more as the whole story is unfolding. Things started out with this huge high note with God creating everything and everyone, and it was good. And then sin and evil entered the world through the failure of one man and one woman that spread to everyone and everything out from there after them. So God then enacts this plan of rescuing and redeeming His creation by working through this one special family. He begins, they weren't really special because of anything that they were or anything they'd done. It was simply because God chose to set His love and favor and grace on this family. And He begins with this one guy, Abraham. At the time, he worships the moon. He has this propensity for prostituting out his wife. He's not a good guy. But over time, God consistently has grace on him, and we see Abraham change to the point that he really comes to know and love and trust and follow God. And at the end of his life, he passes on this special covenant family promise to his son Isaac. Now Isaac, too, he follows in his father's footsteps of pimpery and rebellion against God. He plays favorites with his kids and attempts to pass on the blessing to his favorite son. It doesn't work out, and in the end, he acknowledges it, and he gets back on track with God and blessing the son that God told him to, and that's Jacob. And at the end of Isaac's life, he really seemingly dies a happy man. Jacob, the next guy in line, he gets himself into all kinds of trouble. He lies to his dad. He cheats and steals from his brother. He ends up having children from 4 different women. Those kids, they grow up and they get into all kinds of trouble, everything from kidnapping to rape, mass murder, and all kinds of sexual promiscuity. It's just a total mess. With Jacob, God, he regularly interjects himself almost at every turn where there's failure and affirms his love and his kindness for Jacob and his family. And what we end up seeing is Jacob's heart increasingly softening, and he really begins to believe in and trust and follow God. Oftentimes, trusting and following God is a process, and there's a lot of God's work involved in doing that. As the book starts to wind down and you're coming toward the end where we are, as the reader, you're wondering if any of these guys are ever going to get it right. And then this guy, Joseph, comes along. He's very gifted, very talented. He's blessed by God. Jacob, his father, is all about Joseph. He likes him a lot. But it very quickly goes to Joseph's head. And he uses his natural-born talent and favor to really trash his siblings. And they get so mad that they almost kill him, but instead, at the last moment, decide to sell him into slavery instead. Up to this point in our study, Joseph, in the book of Genesis, pretty much as far as we've seen, nothing goes right for him. He gets sold into slavery by his brothers, and his dad thinks he's dead. He then tries to be this good slave, and he does a pretty good job for a while impressing his master until he upsets the master's wife, which gets him thrown in prison for it. While in prison, he tries to help out the other prisoners, but they don't really return the favor toward him. Where we left off last time we were together in Genesis and looking at Joseph, he was just sitting, rotting in prison. And you're left wondering, man, is it ever going to get better for this guy, Joseph? And on a bigger level, you're kind of wondering, like, what the heck is up with God's plan with this special family? Because things don't look so good, don't seem like they're turning out too well. The rest of the book of Genesis from here out takes a sharp turn. Things change. Things overall have been pretty dark and shady. Things get bad, then God steps in and he has love and grace. Things get better for a little while, then they get bad again, better for a little while, get bad again. There's almost like this kind of flexing, like this breathing in and out in the book of Genesis, where you kind of get your hopes up, but then they die down, and you just can't help but wonder when things are going to get better. Better for Joseph, better for this family, better for the plan of God. They've all been through a lot, and you're kind of wanting to finally see fruit from it all, just to see something good come of all of this. What the point and purpose of it all is. What our chapter for this week does is it takes the first real turn toward that. We're in chapter 41 this morning, so if you've got your Bibles, you can open up there. And we're going to see the first real step toward resolution, to resolve. We like that here at the Resolved Church. So fruit is good that comes from the bad, that we're often having to wait for, watching for, longing for, to see good fruit. This chapter really zeroes in on the person of Joseph, and the central theme that runs through it and that it concludes in is with Joseph being fruitful. With being fruitful. That's where things end up in the chapter, where they end up really at the conclusion of Joseph's life. If you read ahead and you see in chapter 49, when his dad gives him a blessing, he says in verse 22 of Genesis 49, Joseph is a fruitful bow by a spring. So I titled my sermon this morning, Those Who Are Fruitful. With that, let's go ahead and read the chapter. I'll read it, and at the end, I'll say, this is the word of the Lord, and then we can all thank God together for it, for giving us a Bible, and by saying thanks be to God. And then I'll pray over our time working through it. So let's go ahead and read Genesis 41. You can follow along with me, beginning in verse 1. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. And a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and then quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and ugly and thin, such as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly as the beginning. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk, full and good, 7 ears withered, thin, blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. So the 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt, but after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food in these good years that are compiling and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over the land, all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. And he made him ride in his 2nd chariot, and he called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh. Without your consent, no one shall lift up a hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's wife Zephnath-Panah, and he gave him in marriage to Osnath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out in the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly, and he gathered up all the food of these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and put the food in the cities. He put in every city the food from the fields around it, and Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. The name of the second he called Ephraim, for God made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, go to Joseph. What he says to you, do. So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the grain came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain. All the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let's pray. Father, thank you for our time together. We've sought you several times in the service and prayer already, and I just want to ask at this point that you would help us as we talk about what you have written for us in your word, that you would use it to help us to see our great need for you and how you truly fill and fulfill our souls, our lives, and that you, through that, would make us fruitful people for the sake of your glory. In the name of your Son, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right. Those who are fruitful. Fruitful. To be fruitful. Isn't this one of the main driving forces and desires of our lives that we have? To be fruitful? Lately, I use and listen to music a lot through Spotify. You guys know what Spotify is? Basically, the whole music industry, it's undergone this massive change. We used to buy CDs, and now if you want to buy an album, you download it digitally directly. And then with that, there's been this huge shift to internet radio, which kind of the first to come on the scene with that is Pandora, which is good too. It's the most popular. You can kind of pick various music stations based on a genre, an artist, and then it'll just kind of randomly play songs along, that style, which is nice. But then came along Spotify. Spotify's like internet radio, but you can pick the artist and the album you want to listen to, and it'll play just that artist and that album, and you don't have to download anything. The only catch is you can't pick the order of the songs if you are listening to an album, unless you pay this small monthly fee, because if you don't, then you get these commercials, right? So if you pay, you get rid of the commercials. If not, you get commercials. And it's awesome. I don't really mean to be an ad for Spotify, but I like Spotify. I like that. So anyway, I was listening to Spotify the other day, and I was just kind of, for whatever reason, was in a Sinatra mood. So, anybody here like Frank Sinatra? Right? All right, good. So I'm listening to Frank Sinatra on Spotify, and I don't have the paid version. I use the free version, right? So this commercial comes online, this ad for an online software that makes websites. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called Squarespace. An ad for Squarespace, and maybe you've heard this ad. The main part of the ad, it has this tagline. Here's the Squarespace tagline. Here it is. Listen what they say. We believe in the power of the individual to create great things. We believe in the power of the individual to create great things. So their idea is that you can use their software to create a great website. Pretty clever. I get it. It's a good tagline. What I thought about was interesting about the ad was the way that it's framed. The way that it's framed. The thing that they are trying to tap into in us, the consumer, is the desire or appeal in the human person to want to do something great. To want to do something great. That's the assumption that's behind the ad, isn't it? Desire to do something great. That you as an individual have great power and desire to do something great. So use their company to make a great website. You get it? Okay. Now, I don't think that using Squarespace is going to change your life. I like Squarespace and what they do with websites. I like nice, clean lines, minimalistic, sharp photos, good, But I don't think that through making a website with their company, I'm going to feel like, man, I just used my power as an individual to do something so great. This is wonderful. Thank you, God, for Squarespace. Now I can just die happy. Now, I don't think Squarespace is going to change your life, but here's what I do think Squarespace is right about. I think that they're right that we want to do something great. There's something within us as human beings that does want to use our potential. There's something in us that wants to contribute. There's something about who God, I believe, has made us to be that makes us want to do something that counts, something that's great, something that has an impact, something where we use our gifts and our talents and for the good of others, we naturally want to be fruitful. We desire fruit. So in light of that, I'd like to walk us through just 4 simple things today to the hunger for fruit, failing at fruit, working for fruit, and the feasting of fruit. So let's start with hungry for fruit. We've got 2 different characters here in the story, just mainly Joseph and Pharaoh. Both of them, they're hungry. They're hungry in 2 different ways. Joseph, he's just hungry to get out of prison. Doesn't like being there. Verse 1 tells us he's been there for at least 2 years. It's probably more like 4 or 5 because, the chapter before, it had to have taken some time for all of that to unfold. One of the things that we saw in the previous chapter, in chapter 40, is that Joseph, like every man who's in prison, wants out. Unless they have Stockholm Syndrome, they want out of prison. Joseph has this gift of being able to understand and interpret dreams. When he's in prison, he uses this gift to help this dude out, the cupbearer. And he says to him in verse 14 of chapter 40, "Remember me and get me out of this. When you get out, remember me and get me out of this prison." Joseph, he had recognized from an early age that he was naturally gifted and talented with dreams. But all they've ever brought him in his life thus far is trouble. They got him into trouble with his brothers. Holding to the dream is what, that came from God, and he served God, is what got him into trouble with his master's wife and got him thrown into prison. In prison, he uses his dreams, but they didn't help him out with those guys at all. But he knows that's who he is. That that's how God has made him, and that's how God has gifted him. That's what he's got, and he longs to see good things come of it. He's hungry to bear fruit. Pharaoh's the other character in our story, and he's hungry for fruit in a different way. The word Pharaoh, it's really a title. It simply means great house. It identifies the king or the emperor who rules the great house. Based on ancient Egyptian records outside of the Bible, they actually talk about these 7 years of famine that the Bible does, and so that leads most to believe that this is probably the Pharaoh Amenemhet II. Being Pharaoh in Egypt at that time, it was a huge deal. Egypt is the greatest world power on earth at the time, and was so for about 1,300 years. And the Pharaoh, he's pretty much the most powerful man on the planet. He oversees all the people in the land about 13,000 square miles. So this is the big deal to be Pharaoh. But he has a dream, and it's not a good dream at all. Now, most people usually don't put a whole lot of stock in dreams that they have, and that's a good thing. You shouldn't most of the time. Dreams are usually, they are expressions of either wishful thinking or expressions of some underlying fear that you have. They're usually along one of those 2 lines. But there's something different about this pair of dreams that Pharaoh has. He remembers them with distinct detail, and they jack him all up. He's messed up here. Verse 8 says that because of the dreams, his spirit was troubled. His spirit's troubled. Due to these dreams, there's this deep inward anxiety that has come over him. Even in the way that the text describes his experience, it almost describes it like this night terror that he has. Verse 7 says, almost in this exclamatory way, Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was just a dream. He thought it was real, and then he's relieved to find out that he was only dreaming. You ever had that happen to you? You have a dream and you think it's real, and oh my gosh, thanks, it was just a dream. Sweet. The content of these dreams, however, is deeply troubling. It unnerves him, throws his whole life and rulership into this turmoil and chaos. One of the reasons that he probably has such a hard time with these dreams is because of one thing from each of them that would have really thrown him. First, one thing from each, both the cow and the grain. Let's just talk about the cow. The cow, for Egyptians, it was a universally recognized symbol of the goddess Isis. Goddess Isis was seen in the image of a cow. For us, we basically think of a cow as a farm animal, right? So, at least the non-vegans do. When I see cow, I think yum. That's like meat and milk. I like cow. So, I just had my birthday. I just turned 36. My parents said, we want to take you out to dinner, wherever you want to go. And so I'm like, yeah, I want to go to a steakhouse. And so we did. I got this sweet cut of prime rib. And get this, it had this like bacon butter garnish on it. I mean, you can't get better. Like meat on top of meat, that with a glass of Cabernet. I mean, that was like just a little sweet slice of heaven. So when I like see cow, that's what I think. Prime rib. Yes. But in ancient Egypt, the cow is a deity to be worshipped. It is still in some parts of the world today, like in India and Eastern Hinduism and whatnot. It's a deity to be worshipped. Isis, she's the mother goddess who feeds life to her sucklings. Now that might help make a little bit more sense with the way that the text talks about the cows. Hope maybe. I mean, did anybody here find it like a little weird when the Bible's like, there's like attractive cows and then there's like ugly cows? Like, if that caught you, I read that and I thought to myself, what in the heck is a sexy cow? Like, I don't get this. Like, I've never seen a cow and thought, oh man, that is a good looking cow. Like, and then, oh, that one is nasty. Like, oh, no good. Anyway, there's no way that Pharaoh had this dream about cows and doesn't think about the goddess Isis. And the dream ends up really in this violent, cannibalistic mess where the ugly cows devour the attractive ones. And this throws Pharaoh. He's disturbed about what it could mean for him and his people. So he starts searching for an answer. He's hungry for some sort of explanation, hungry for inward peace, security for himself and for his people. You ever found yourself in a similar situation, like Joseph or Pharaoh? You ever felt like Joseph, where you're trying and trying to do everything right, but nothing seems to work out? Ever felt like, man, I know I'm doing what I am supposed to be doing, but fruit doesn't seem to be coming from it? You ever felt like that? I have. Maybe you feel like that now. Or you ever felt like Pharaoh, where something, somewhere, seemingly just out of the blue, something that you don't expect just throws you, and you end up in a deeply troubled spirit? I mean, you ever had like those nights where you just can't sleep because you're thinking about something and you just can't turn it off? You can't get it out of your mind. You're troubled in spirit because of what's bothering you. You ever felt like that? I have. Maybe you're there now. If you've been there, then you know this type of hunger that we're seeing. Where do you turn? So let's move on and see how Pharaoh and Joseph attempt to address that in the next point, failing at fruit. What happens with Pharaoh is he goes searching for an answer, asking for help, and even that he gets that far, that he goes and asking help, that's telling. You see, Pharaoh was considered and seen as divine himself. He was worshipped as a mediator god. His role really as the Pharaoh in that is to be this connection between life on earth and the spirit world. So, that's what the pyramids are all about. You've all heard about, one of the great, 7 wonders of the world, the ancient pyramids. They were built to ensure the safe passage of the Pharaoh from one world to the other. That's the whole thing that the pyramids are all about. He's a mediator god. So when Pharaoh goes to the magicians asking for help, they're probably like, why are you asking us? Like, because he's basically like the chief magician, Pharaoh. So, but he's so troubled, he goes to them. Verse 8 says he called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And these guys were no joke. I mean, this is like a huge professional job. They've got this, almost like this whole science for it. They've got remedies for medical issues, to demon exorcisms. They manufactured amulets and dolls and spells to deal with evil spirits. They've got these dream books. They've got religious texts. They've got resources, seemingly both natural and supernatural, at their fingertips. It's a big deal, the magician and wise man culture in Egypt. But none of these guys, none of them have an explanation. They don't have an answer for Pharaoh. They fail. Verse 8 says, there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. In verse 24, says Joseph, I told it to all the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. That's big. That none of these guys had an explanation. That's a big deal. Whether it was because they just didn't get it, it didn't match up with what they knew from their dream books and the religious text, or whether it was because they actually did know, but they're like afraid to tell Pharaoh. I mean, they don't want them to won't want to be thrown in prison or something. Who knows? What is clear is that they fail Pharaoh, and he's left just as troubled. Apparently, he's so troubled that he tells his cupbearer about it. And if you remember, when we talked about the cupbearer, his job was basically to test the wine to make sure it didn't have any poison, so that he would, test it before Pharaoh had it. So Pharaoh tells the cupbearer, and it's at this point that the cupbearer finally, after 2 years, remembers Joseph and how he interpreted his dream over 2 years ago. He tells Pharaoh the story, and right away Pharaoh has Joseph pulled out of prison. And when Joseph gets there, what he says is astonishing. Let's check it out. Let's look at it together. 2 main things he says. Verse 16. First thing Joseph says is, it is not in me. It is not in me. And then he says, God will give, or only, another way it could be translated, only God can give an answer, or a favorable answer. And this is huge. Finally, it's Joseph's chance to get out of prison. I mean, finally it's his chance to make something of himself. He's got a huge opportunity here. What does he say? I can't do it. God's the only hope. I can't do it. It's not in me. It's not in me. This is perhaps the most real and true, honest thing that a human being can ever say about themselves. It's not in me. To admit that we don't have what it takes, even when we know that we're gifted or good at something, to say, I still don't have what it takes. That's the real truth. It doesn't matter how smart you are, or how strong you are, even if you experience success for a time, how talented you are. No one has it in themselves. And at one point or another, eventually, the world will beat you down until you realize it. That it's not in you. You don't have what it takes. I think that's the real and honest truth about who we are as human beings. The funny thing is it seems that in our culture, we are constantly being told the opposite. We're constantly being told the opposite thing. I mean, just like the Squarespace ad suggesting that you have this power in you. And we're like, I think of I'm a kid of the 80s, so like Back to the Future, Doc McBrown. You can accomplish anything if you put your mind to it. You can, it's in you. You can do it. But no, you can't. I mean, when I was on vacation, when we went to go camping, we were pulling a trailer, and we had some car issues, and I blew my radiator. And so, our whole family, all 3 of our girls are, screaming and crying, and it's, hot. And, we're pulled over on the side of the road, and I open up the hood, and I can just see the radiators blown, right there. And I stop, and I just start thinking, I'm like, is there any way I can fix this? Duct tape maybe? I really put my mind to it. I can accomplish anything. I've got the power in me. But I couldn't. Had to call a tow truck. I was watching the UFC fights the other night, and I'm a big UFC fan. If you don't know what UFC is, basically it's the sport of mixed martial arts where 2 guys will get in a cage and fight. And anyway, one of the fights the other night was this heavyweight bout, and in the first round, this guy Alistair Overeem, he gets clipped with this overhand right from this guy named Ben Rothwell, and it stuns him, and it leads to this TKO in the first round. And immediately after the fight, the announcer goes up to Big Ben Rothwell and asks him, man, how did you prepare for this fight? Tell us how you're feeling. Here's his answer. Here's what he says, immediately. This is the first words out of his mouth. What Ben says, he says, you just witnessed everyone What happens when you believe in yourself? It's the strongest power in the universe. That's what he said. You just witnessed everyone. What happens when you believe in yourself? It's the strongest power in the universe. That is the most stupid thing I have ever heard. Like, what I witnessed was you landing a lucky punch. It wasn't because you believed in yourself and you tapped into this magic power in the universe and were able to knock Alistair over email. But isn't this the message that we hear all the time? Just believe in yourself. You can do it. Just believe in yourself. What does that even mean? Okay, so I'm supposed to psych myself out into thinking that I can really do something that I think I can't do. And that's believing in myself. I mean, what is there to believe in me? It's the most asinine thing I have ever heard of. I remember a few years back when, before the whole blackfish thing, people still liked Shamu at SeaWorld. And they had this whole show, and maybe you were there and you saw it, and the whole show was called Believe. And if you saw that show, it was basically a message to say, believe in yourself and in your dreams, and if you believe enough, it'll come true and it'll happen. Just believe in yourself. I'd taken my family to it, and it just torqued me so much. I was so upset. I went home and I wrote a blog titled "Shamu is a Heretic." You see, here's the problem. I'm not lying. You can go look it up online. It's there. Here's the problem. What happens when you believe in yourself, but then you fail? What happens? Where do you turn? What happens to your whole belief system when you find out that yourself is insufficient? So here's the thing. You know what? I guarantee it. I promise it. I bet my whole life and all my money on it. That sometime, sooner or later, in some upcoming fight, Ben Rothwell will eventually lose to another guy. No matter how much he believes in himself or how much he taps into this magic power in the universe, no matter how much he puts his mind to it, no one can stop the tide of death, which will ultimately shatter everybody's dreams, no matter how much they believe in themselves. And that's why I think that Joseph's words here are the most true and honest thing we could ever say about ourselves and our situation. And I think it's truly what we know deep down. It's not in me. I don't have what it takes. I'm not God. And you know what's sweet about that confession and that admission? What's sweet about it, at least in this context, it's not a hopeless one, but it's one that calls out for the need of something greater, namely someone greater. Joseph says it's not in me, but then the second thing, it's in God. Oh, it is in God. There is one who has what it takes, who will never fail. God can give an answer. And this, my friends, is the basic belief system that we must decide between. Whether the answers of life are found in God or in us or something else. Whether it's in God or something else. There's really only two options. Really only two. See, this was a huge deal for Joseph to personally admit that he didn't have it in him. It's an even bigger deal for him to say that the answer was in God. I mean, when he tells Pharaoh this, Pharaoh's the most powerful plan on the planet. And he says that neither you nor your magicians or your wise men or any of your religious belief systems, none of your gods can help. He single-handedly just disregards Pharaoh's entire worldview. That's pretty risky what Pharaoh said. It took a lot of guts to dismiss all of it and say it's got to be in God. Verse 5, he says, God has revealed it. And this really is the claim of Christianity. So understand, this is what we believe and what we teach as Christians. And our church, we're saying that God has told us that He exists. He has told us what uh, who he is, who we are, what's going on in the world, and what's wrong with it, and he's given us a solution. His son, Jesus Christ. So what this means is that Christianity is a religion that is based on revelation. Christianity is based, a religious system based on revelation. So if you're not here, you're not yet a Christian, we're glad that you're here, checking things out, that's cool. We believe God has revealed himself in three ways. So one, through his footprint, the footprint of his existence in nature. What we can know from nature and from reason. Theologians call this general revelation. Second way, that we can know things through God's revelation in the Bible and what he has had people write about himself. Theologians call this special revelation. The second thing. And then the third one in the person and work of Jesus Christ, his son. Sometimes people see this as a subset of special revelation, but another term for it, the incarnation. That God took on flesh in Jesus, says, here I am. And he dies on the cross and rises again for our sin. So you really only have two options to decide between, whether the answer is in God or in us or something else. You can either see things from the bottom up, like by what you can know and figure out by science and your experience and your reason and your feelings, or you can see things from the top down, the revelation of God, that God says who he is and what's going on in his world and in you and what the answer is. Only two options. In our story, both Pharaoh and Joseph, they fail. They fall flat. They fail at fruit. And the answer the text gives is that it can only come from God. You ever found yourself in a place like Pharaoh here, where things just don't make sense? None of the answers that anybody else gives make any sense either. Nobody's got an explanation. Life can be really confusing at times. My suggestion, along with Joseph here, is to turn to God at the answers in him. So let's see how that works out in our next point, working for fruit. So Pharaoh tells Joseph his dreams. He interprets them. Joseph, he doesn't need any magic books or spells or anything to do that. The Bible doesn't say how God reveals it to him, but with just how he reveals what the dreams mean. But we know that Joseph has this gift to correctly understand and interpret them, and it comes from God. The dreams turn out to be pretty simple. Both of them communicate the same message with two different pictures. Joseph says they're about the future and mean there's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Great plenty, then severe famine. What I want to focus on at this point is Joseph's response to this message from God. Verse 32, he says that all this stuff is supposed to happen over the coming 14 years. He says it's fixed by God. It's fixed by God. Now, once we get to Genesis chapter 50, we're going to spend a whole week, do a whole sermon really on this, talking about how everything that happens is fixed by God, as evidenced both by the story of Joseph and some direct statements in the book numerous times. But I really don't want to get into the whole details and questions that can all come up from that today. So just stick around, keep coming back, and we'll get there. It's one line in our text, and what's interesting to me is really the response of Joseph, who understands and believes that the future is fixed by God. His response. He's moved, you notice, to action. He's moved to action rather than inaction. Rather than just sitting back and be like, oh, well, man, that sucks for you, Pharaoh. And peace out. Instead of just sitting back and doing nothing, he suggests that they do something. Okay? See, oftentimes people say, well, if you think that everything is fixed and predetermined by God, then there's no reason or point to do anything. Well, not according to Joseph. And that's actually what the text emphasizes. So he suggests a plan to Pharaoh. He suggests that Pharaoh, takes a fifth of everything and of all the produce and during the productive years, and they store it all up for food that then they can dole out later from their reserves when the famine strikes. Now, I love this. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the story, Joseph coming up with this plan here. Not necessarily like what the plan is, but that he comes up with the plan. I love that he comes up with the plan here that he presents and proposes to Pharaoh. I really don't like it when people complain. It's so easy to throw rocks at people and things. It's so easy to tear someone or something apart. It's much harder to actually build something and to work at that. Um, I mean, sure, Joseph, he addressed a huge problem here. He saw, but from the dream, but he presents then a solution. His attitude is one of offering help, not just criticizing. Some of you have a really critical spirit, and you just need to stop. It doesn't help you or anyone else. I mean, if you see a problem, fine. That's okay. Yeah, there's problems to address. But then start thinking how you can lead the change in addressing that problem. Be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. I mean, think about it. You see a problem, come up with a plan. Like, I am all ears. I mean, some of you are way smarter and more gifted than I am. You see a ministry that you think we should have as a church? Great. Come up with a plan. See something we should be doing? Let's do it. Come up with a plan and proposal. Like, submit it to the elders and we'll go through it together. Is there a problem you see with one of the ministries not going so well? Okay, we'll figure out how you can improve it and fix it and address that thing. I mean, that's kind of a negative thing, but I think it just needs to be hit head on. Like, if you got a critical spirit, stop. Start trying to be part of the solution. Come up with a plan instead of just throwing rocks at something, deconstructing it. Let's construct. That's kind of negative, so let me say it in a more positive way. I think that you have huge potential. Each and every one of you. I really mean it. Not because of anything in you, but because of what God could do in and through you and how He's made you to be and how He's gifted you. I think you have great potential. I really do. I think every person in this room was uniquely created by God, and He has something unique and special for you to offer with your hands. I just want to see you be putting it to use. That's part of my job, to equip you for the work that God has called you to do. Chris, our church planning intern, he preached a good sermon a couple weeks ago on serving while I was out, and the day that we had the ministry fair here. And I just got to tell you, I am just so happy and so proud of so many. I heard tons of people signed up to serve in various ways, and I'm just really proud of you. And maybe you weren't here for that, and you can still sign up and get involved in ministries. Talk to the people at the info booth. I mean, there's something 18, 19 different ministries at the church here that you can get involved in. I'm really stoked. This sermon, in some ways, is kind of like a follow-up to that sermon that Chris gave. Just be fruitful. Put your gifts to use. Do something. Use your time and your talent and your treasure for God's kingdom. One of the things that's on my heart and that I'm really passionate about is dreaming big. I believe that God has uniquely placed us here in San Diego for this time and has a specific thing for us to accomplish. He wants us to accomplish big things for Him and for His glory in our city. We're seeing more and more people come to Christ through the ministry of our church. We're seeing more and more people get involved and mature and serve and be in the church together. God has just quite literally gifted us with this awesome, beautiful building this last year, and I think He wants us to use all of it, who we are and what He has given us for His glory and furtherance of His kingdom. And I'm really, really excited about that and what's ahead. I've been spending time reading and praying and studying, consulting experts, and looking ahead for the next few years and what God has for us in the next season of our church. So some stuff that I'm super excited about rolling out at the next members meeting. So I really encourage you to be there for that. I'm excited for my part in that, and I'm just as, if not more, excited about your part in that and how God will use you. The role that you'll play. So like Joseph, come up with a plan, get in the game. There's a spiritual famine in our land. Figure out how you can be a part of spreading the spiritual fruit that God has blessed us with. One simple way you can do that, one simple way, is just telling people about our church. Okay? Since fall's statistically the biggest growth season of the year, let's try to capitalize on that. I had a group meeting with Lindsay Maffett this week, who oversees and runs the marketing and media ministry of our church. And she has declared September Social Media Month for our church. So there's going to be a contest that you'll hear about I think, at the end of the service. But basically, we want to encourage everyone to spread the word as much as possible through social media. Okay? Here's the thinking behind that. People don't use phone books anymore. They died. And flyers and most ads, they really don't work, and they're like insanely expensive. But you know what does work? Social media. So what we want is for you to be like Instagramming and tweeting and Facebooking and doing all of that crazy business, but doing it for God's glory. Okay? You know, share our page, post stuff with the Resolve Church hashtag, do all that. We've got a brand new website. It was supposed to go live yesterday. There's some technical difficulties, so I think it should be either like later today or tomorrow. So, you know, tell people about it. Tell them to check it out. And, you know, I get it. Some of you are kind of gutless to like actually invite somebody to church face to face, but man, it's not hard to like, you know, do a little typing on your computer. So maybe try that out. That was mean. I don't know. You have great potential. No, we put a lot of effort here in our church as being a people on mission. You're going to see some people who are becoming members today, and what we tell them is that they're signing up to be missionaries along with us in our city. And by that we mean making friends with people who aren't Christians and having them into your home and getting to know them and their stories and life, having meals with them. We really push that through our community groups, you know, and them being a people on mission and serving our city. We haven't been like a big like come and see church, you know, put a big emphasis on an attractional ministry philosophy. Okay. However, at the same time, we do that because there's such an emphasis in the Bible on go out. You know, we go out and try to reach people. But at the same time, there's actually a lot of emphasis in the Bible on come too, and inviting people to come. Jesus says, come to me. And then he sends the disciples out, and then they go get people and then bring them to Jesus. Like, you got to go like here and see this guy and who he is and what he's done. So let's invite people to come and see what Jesus is doing in and among us, okay? Sound good? You guys with me? All right, cool. I told you, like, I'm like all rested, and now I'm ready to run like 200 miles an hour and go turbo, so like, here we go. I'm going to stress all of you out for the next 2 months, and then when Christmas comes, we'll relax a little bit again, okay? That's the plan. And you know it's coming. All right, last point. Let's get on to it. Feasting on fruit. Joseph comes up with a plan. Pharaoh loves Joseph's plan, and I love what he says in verse 38. Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God in him? Pharaoh's, he's the most powerful, just pagan ruler, but he recognizes the Spirit of God at work in Joseph. It's a great question. Do people recognize the Spirit of God at work in you? When people around you and spending time with you, do they pick up that God means a lot to you? Or that, maybe even more pointed, that they can tell this is someone that's been spending time with God. And people sense that you've been spending time with Jesus. Anyway, Pharaoh likes Joseph's plan, thinks there's no better person for the job than him, so he hires him for the job. And what we get in verses 40 through 44 is one of the most descriptive pieces of ancient Egyptian customs, which remarkably fits with a perfect parallel to what we know about ancient Egyptian culture and practice in that period of time. So it's just another mark on the high level of accuracy and authenticity that's preserved in the Bible as a book that you can trust. It's quite phenomenal what happens to Joseph. He gets set over all the land. He's given Pharaoh's signet ring to sign documents with authority. He's given a royal robe to replace the one that his dad gave him and that his brothers tore up. He's given this gold chain for his neck. He's taken on this chariot tour through the city and have people bow down to him. He's given a new name and a beautiful wife. At long last, Joseph is fruitful. The original dream that he had way back when he was a teenager is beginning to come true. He's still only 30 years old, but he's no longer this arrogant, proud punk. But as Pharaoh says in verse 38, he's discerning and wise, this young man. On top of it all, God blesses him with children. He fulfills the command of his first words to man to be fruitful and to multiply. That's another way you can be fruitful. Go make some babies. He does so. He fathers 2 sons. And what he says about his sons is pretty important. First one, he names Manasseh, which means forgetfulness. It says in verse 51, he named him that because he says, God has made me forget all my hardship in all my Father's house. The second son he names Ephraim, which means fruitfulness. So forgetfulness and fruitfulness. It says, verse 52, he names Ephraim this because God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So just a couple things on these guys and their names. First, on forgetfulness. The funny thing about naming a son this is it actually ended up being a constant reminder of all the bad stuff that would happen to him, because every time he thinks about, forget, what's he supposed to forget, right? So you're still going to remember that. So I don't think that's what he really means when he says this, that he's like, oh, I don't want to ever remember who my family is anymore or anything like that. I think he means to move on from it, to move forward and move past it, to no longer dwell on it and have it affect him in so much in the way that it did. I think what Joseph is communicating in naming his son this is similar to what the Bible says in the New Testament in the book of Philippians. In Philippians chapter 3, verse 13 and 14 says, forgetting what is behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. I think that's kind of what is getting. You see, for many of us, there's been bad stuff that's happened in our lives, either sins done unto us or things that we've done. They're bad memories. And there comes a point when we just have to forget all of that stuff and move on. Move on and move ahead in following God. Sometimes we hit a point where you got to stop dwelling on something, having it affect you so much, and just move on. Doesn't mean you don't remember what happened, but you forget it. You move on. So does that make sense? Maybe there's some of you here today and you just have some things that you need to forget. You have some, it's time to move on. Some things you just got to let go of and trust God with. With Joseph's other son, Ephraim, Joseph looks ahead on all the good that God has done and yet will do. He recognizes God's blessing of fruitfulness in his life and in the land. The fruitfulness is obviously more than just his son. It's a picture of his whole life, which is why a few chapters later his dad says that Joseph is the fruitful bow. What we're seeing here is really a very happy Joseph. He's fruitful. He's feasting on it. All of what he said would take place, it does. He follows through with his plan. It works. It's really a picture of the joy and fulfillment that comes from obeying God and having him use you for his purposes. And none of us has anything to offer. It's not in us. But when God uses you, when He uses us and we're fruitful, we're a happy people. Maybe you're here today and you're simply in a place where you need to just sit and rest and be satisfied that what God has done in and through you. You just need to, maybe you're here, you just need to know that God's proud of you. You put your hand to work for Him and God is pleased. Well done. I don't think that there's any life better than the one of serving God. God doesn't immediately promise to deliver us out of the land of our affliction. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes a lifetime with the affliction you may have to deal with. But I am convinced that being fruitful for God is the feast of life. So if you walk away with one simple thing today, walk away with that there's no better life than the one of being fruitful for God. Well, let's wrap this up and conclude. What we need to do here, as the band comes up here, is to see how all this points to Jesus. The story has been about this guy Joseph, who God made to be fruitful in a land of famine. But we start out today was talking with the need and the desire in us to do something that counts, something that matters. We've learned we don't have it in ourselves to accomplish that, but what God did in Joseph was unique. Verse 38 says the Spirit of God was in him, which is the first time we ever hear of God doing that in a person in the Bible, and that actually becomes his pattern after this when he goes to do something great and accomplish it through a person. His Spirit would come upon an individual and he would empower them to do something great for his glory. Yet, when that would happen, it would only be for a limited time. Until Jesus, that is. When Jesus came, God sent His Son into the world to accomplish the greatest work of all, bringing healing to our famished hearts and lives because of sin. One of the many days that Jesus was teaching and preaching, He said something striking. In John chapter 15 and verse 5, he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. He says, apart from me, you can do nothing. It's eerily similar to what Joseph said when he said, it's not in me. It's not in us, in and of ourselves. We can do nothing. But Jesus did not come to condemn us, but to gift us and to bless us. Listen to what he says right before that clear and bold statement. We've got the verse there on the screen. Right before he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Whole verse, Jesus says, I am the vine. You are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. When Jesus came, he came so that his Spirit might be poured out on all flesh permanently, put in all people who trust in him. Trust in him as the vine. And when we're in him, then and only then can we bear true fruit. Not waste our lives away without ever really accomplishing anything that matters. Our story in Genesis 41 concludes with Pharaoh saying to all the people, whenever they have trouble, problem, verse 56, he says, go to Joseph. Do what he says. Go to Joseph. Who are we in the story? We're the famished people. We're the famished ones. We're empty and hungry and in need. But God sent his son Jesus into the world, and he calls us to go to Jesus. To go to Jesus and to do what he says. And what Jesus says to do is to believe in him. We're to put our faith and trust in him, put our lives in his hands as our Savior, and have him provide for the need of our hearts. The reason Jesus can do this is because of his life, death, and resurrection. We're going to sing a couple more songs and respond by coming to the table of Jesus to receive the fruitful elements of this, and the bread and the wine is Jesus' body and blood. The story we saw, hunger for fruit, failure for fruit, working for fruit, the feast of fruit. Jesus is the one who accomplishes all these things for us. There's trouble in the world in our hearts, and it was due to Jesus' hunger to do something about it that he came. Joseph didn't have what it takes in him, but Jesus had what it takes, and he did not fail. He went to work, living the life we failed at, and he followed through with his plan all the way to the cross to die for all of our failures. All so that we might sit at the table of heaven and feast on all of his goodness that he has provided for us. Jesus is the true fulfillment of the story that God brings us to. So as you respond today, go to Jesus. Whatever your need is, go to him with it. You hunger and thirst, he has eternal bread and living water to offer you. You recognize that you've been a failure, go to him who never failed, but instead forgives and gives you all of his successes for free. If you've got some work to do, you know that God's plan and sense his calling to do your part, go to Jesus. Offer your time, talent, and treasure to him that he might use you for his purposes and his glory in the world. And lastly, if you're needing to forget some things, you're needing to follow through with some stuff, stick with it so that you might experience the feast. Go to Jesus. He's prepared a table for you that you might dine with him. Let's go to him in prayer. Father, thank you for the story. We thank you for sending Jesus. Thank you for the fruit that he purchased for us on the cross. And so without money, without anything to offer in us, we come to him to buy and to receive all of his goodness. Would you work in your people in these special holy moments, I pray. In Jesus' good name, amen.